Hey everyone, it's Strange Michael, and I'd like to welcome you back to another Hidden Horrors movie review, where when I find hidden gems from either my past or something I recently found that I watched, I like to talk about them here on the channel to recommend them to you in case you haven't seen them before or even heard about the reputation they may or may not have. This is one that I've loved since I was in high school, about I want to say 12, 13 years ago when I started getting into Stephen King books. I started reading a lot of his stuff, and I started hunting down a lot of movie adaptations from Stephen King's work, and I came across on YouTube, when you could watch movies in parts, by the way, this particular movie that I also found on VHS about a month ago, and I showed you guys in a movie haul video I did. This is The Dark Half. It is a George Romero film from 1993. He wrote and directed it, and based it, with a really cool poster and everything, on the Stephen King book by the same name that I've never read. I've had this book in my collection forever. I miss when Stephen King covers looked like this, with this style and aesthetic, and also this price. This was an $8 book. This book now on these goofy-ass tall paperbacks are like 30 bucks. Who's gonna pay 30 bucks for a paperback? Why would you do that? That's stupid. And they're just as heavy as hardcovers. People bought paperbacks back in the day, as a small rant, by the way, because they were cheaper than hardcovers, and they were easier on your hands and on your arms, for that matter. The Dark Half is a blast of a film. I think it's a film that does not get the appreciation it deserves at all. Therefore, it's a hidden horror movie review for me. I never hear people talk about it. I've never heard anybody I know in real life mention this movie, not once. I'm not the hardcore George Romero fan that you may think most horror fans are. I love Night of the Living Dead, which my channel is named after. I think it's a fantastic movie. The best zombie film probably ever made, aside from Zack Snyder's remake of the second film that Romero made, Dawn of the Dead. Dawn of the Dead I've never been a fan of, the original at least. Never really been impressed with it. I've only seen it like one time. I've seen one cut, by the way. There's like 4 cuts of that movie. I haven't seen the other ones. I know all of them are pretty much up on YouTube now that the film's been out of print for so long. I may or may not try to watch it sometime this year to review for the channel. I really want to watch a lot of the films because there's like 7 of these, and a book that Romero was writing before he died that another guy was brought in to finish called The Living Dead. So I respect Romero. I think that the original Night and Day of the Dead are some of the best things he ever did in his career, but he's also worked with Stephen King on Creepshow, in case you didn't know that. I don't remember if Romero was involved with Creepshow 2 or not. Maybe he wrote it and didn't direct it. I don't know. I did a brief look over on IMDb, and I can't remember what he did or did not do with Creepshow 2. But Dark Half, I think, is fantastic, whether it be the concept, some of the visuals you see in this movie. I don't know what kind of budget they had. This looks to me like one of the most well-shot Romero movies ever. Easily. A lot of his stuff, I think, even dating back to Night of the Living Dead, looks kind of simple and kind of low budget. This movie doesn't really look like that for its time in 1993. It's a blast, man. Basically, I'll get into the plot now. You have this guy named Thad Beaumont, who happens to be a famous writer, but not by his own name. He's writing under another name. I think it's George Stark, and I think I remember that because of Tony Stark. And this other author name that he had to come up with is really the moneymaker. His actual name that he writes under doesn't really get anything popularity-wise. He mainly just kind of writes serious drama and fiction, and then when he's writing under the George Stark name, he basically makes just really skimpy, slutty shit that people like myself would probably review on their channel. So this is the kind of thing that makes a person popular, because, you know, it happens. Stephen King admitted to that a long time ago. It's happened with people. And you can tell this is a very personal story to Stephen King, with he and his fake name Richard Bachman that he used to write under years ago. I think that's really interesting that he brought that idea into this book. And it's cool. Again, I haven't read the book, but this movie and the story is really interesting to me. But basically, kind of, the film begins with Thad when he's a kid, and he has a lot of headaches. And they eventually do a surgery on him and find out he had some kind of like unborn twin that was combined into his body. And that was horrific. Many years later, after he's gotten married, he's had a couple of kids, things begin to go a little weird, the headaches begin to come back, and some strange things begin to happen to this college professor, writer, whatever he is. I don't really know what he does for a living. I think he's both. But still, things are beginning to happen to him, and when he has encounters with people who are, you know, trying to rip him off. For example, this one guy that finds out that Thad also writes the George Stark books, He basically gets a vendetta in his mind against that guy, and then the dude turns up dead, right? And nobody knows what's going on. And this begins to repeatedly happen to Thad, and Michael Rooker, his friend who happens to be a cop, begins to investigate Thad Beaumont and everything around him, all of the people he's encountered and whatever. But like I said, people begin to show up dead constantly. There's also this big theme, not really theme, but this big thing about, ravens and crows and shit, which is what the cover depicts here as well. They're swarming all over this movie for many a reason. I think that really pays off in the end. Now, you kind of have, with the title itself, referring to a dark half, there is kind of this confusing thing that I think would be explained better in the Stephen King book. Maybe, maybe not. Maybe I missed a couple of lines in here, I don't know. But it seems like there's this possibly supernatural element to this, which it's not as simple as Siamese twin growing up. It's a very interesting thing how this takes its performance. It kind of has to do with twins quite a bit. I thought that was pretty interesting too. And I like it. I think it has a lot going for it when it comes to that stuff, despite the film seemingly mishandling that, but I don't want to say mishandling it because Stephen King books, a lot of the time, trying to adapt those to screen, like the crazy turtle sequences from the Stephen King book It. If you've read that, you probably know what I'm talking about. When Stephen King goes all cosmic and supernatural and weird, a lot of the time, if it's not simplistic like The Shining or Carrie, with a telekinetic girl or a haunted hotel or whatever, and a psychic kid, it gets too outlandish and it gets too hard to transfer to screen for audiences. And I think if I had to bet money, this is probably one of those cases where George Romero could only do so much to adapt what King had to screen. They haven't gotten every detail corrected. I know a lot of people that bitch about this movie are saying all of this nonsense, like the George Stark character in the film having blonde hair in the book and just basically having brown hair in this movie. Very interesting complaints that really, at the end of the day, don't fucking matter. Timothy Hutton, the dad from Haunting of Hill House from Mike Flanagan, plays the Thad Beaumont character here, and the bad guy, George Stark. And I think he's really good in both roles. He's amazing as Thad, and I think as George, he's kind of a little too goofy sometimes, and I blame that on Romero, and I blame that on the script from Romero. I don't so much blame Timothy Hutton. He doesn't have a massive name in Hollywood, but I do like him. I think he just has this likable quality to him. I think the young lady playing his wife is good. Michael Rooker is good. Hell, even the two twin babies in the film of Thad Beaumont, they're good for the small role they play in here. But the George Stark character gets a little silly and a little goofy sometimes, and I could see that being kind of the missing point for a lot of people, that they watch this movie, they're into it, and then as soon as his cowboy boot-wearing ass shows up, they're like, nope, I'm done, and kind of back out of the whole situation and just put the movie off. But I would ask you to please, even if you are that person, stick through it, because it has some surprises for you by the end of the movie that I think you'll enjoy. And again, it has this small-scale feel to it that a lot of movies don't really do that anymore. A lot of them really don't. The closest I've seen in recent years, aside from a VHS sequel, is, let's say Cobweb, for example. Cobweb does that very well. It's a small-scale, mostly one-location movie that takes advantage of that in a wonderful way. Dark Half is kind of like that, but in 1993, that was the common thing to do with smaller-budget Hollywood movies. This film has a lot to offer, and I will say, the practical effects in it are shocking. Shocking, dude. Whether we're talking about in the ending where they kind of combine practical with a little bit of CGI, that stuff looks really good for the most part, except for a couple of things involving ravens and birds. Mainly when they fly, they look like shit. But there's a scene in the beginning with the surgery with the doctors that to this day puts a chill down my spine and makes me squirm because of how gross it is. But this film has a couple of gross moments, but it's not really focused on that. Think of it more of like a film that's mostly a family drama. Maybe not so much a family drama, because his marriage is good. But this struggle with this antagonist killer guy that Thad is being blamed for, and framed, I guess, too. Think about that but also having some body horror elements involved in that project. That's basically what Dark Half is, and I think it's really good for that. This is not overly complicated or overly complex, but some of the logic doesn't make sense because of, like I said, probably the adaptation from Stephen King's book to this movie. If I had to bet, it kind of flops in that way sometimes. But the film itself I do think is entertaining, it's fun to watch, and I have a good time every time I watch it, and I do recommend it alone based on that. It has a decent musical soundtrack and score. I do like that pretty good. Kind of cheesy, but it fits. I like it. It's a very 90s movie overall. And it looks good, like I said. In case I forgot to mention this again, I think it's one of the most well-shot George Romero films. It just has this very distinct look to it that doesn't feel like Romero is the one shooting it. It feels like it's better looking than something like, Creepshow or the Dead films or anything like that to me personally. Dark Half has a lot to offer. It's not perfect by any means, but between the performances and the practical effects when they're there, and even some of the CGI when that's there too, this is a hell of a film, man. I bet the book is better, but this is a good movie, and I recommend it quite a bit, whether it be as a person who happens to be watching this looking for Stephen King movie reviews to check out some new Stephen King adaptations they've never seen. I'd recommend it for that if you're looking for just a cool Romero film you haven't seen, or if you're going through his backlog of stuff before he passed away, sadly. This is a good one. This is one that will stand out to you. It's one of my favorites of his, possibly my top 3 movies he ever made. I haven't seen everything he did, but this is up there for me. I think it's a really cool, interesting movie. But at the end of the day, Dark Half is a massively underappreciated film that I recommend highly. It has so much to provide for you as a viewer that if you're into horror, and you don't mind kind of not so serious horror, not saying horror comedy, but just not so serious horror, doesn't mind being cheesy like a lot of the Romero stuff is, this is a good one. This is something I think you'll appreciate and enjoy for the most part, if you give it a shot. But anyway, Dark Half, I like it a lot. I recommend it. It's a good nostalgic movie for me from my high school days. I remember watching this on YouTube so much, like I said, I probably saw it 2 or 3 times on YouTube because of how much I enjoyed it. And to my surprise, it was just something that stood out amongst many adaptations of Stephen King's work. I didn't know who Romero was at that point. I didn't know that he had this reputation he had. But I'm just sad to see people not talk about this movie. It deserves it. It deserves love. And you should comfort it. You should buy a copy and comfort it. Good luck finding it on Blu-ray or something. I've never seen this out in the wild on Blu-ray or DVD or anything. Had to find a VHS copy randomly at a store, at a thrift store, like I said, nonetheless. And I got it, thank God. So, really cool flick. I recommend it. It kind of fits this time of the year when you're not really into summer, but it sometimes, especially in the flashbacks when Thad is a kid, has this summer look to it that I love. Very cool film. The Dark Half, have you seen it? What do you think about it? I'd love to hear your thoughts and comments about it down in the comment section down below. What is your most, I guess, big recommendation of a Romero film that's not talked about? This would easily be mine at the current moment. And if I had to rate the film, by the way, after you leave all that down in the comment section down below for me, some recommendations. By the way, at some point I plan on marathoning Romero's entire career, just like I plan on doing, like, John Carpenter's horror films and such later on at some point. Probably not this year, but eventually I will do something like that. I do want to do kind of director series like James Wan movies and so on and so on. But when it comes to Dark Half, I was going to say this a moment ago, if I had to rate it on a 5-star basis, I would probably give this about a 4 out of 5 stars. I think I love it a lot more than most people do. But let me tell you a little anecdote real quick. My wife hates horror. She hates Stephen King. She's reading Bag of Bones for the first time, her first Stephen King book ever right now, and she hates that shit. But let me tell you, I was watching this over there on a couch, and she was over there in the same room putting something together that she was going to put in a garden outside. And she got bored, she wanted to take a break, and she came over to the couch and sat down beside me, and she admitted she'd been listening to the film. She doesn't watch movies, horror or otherwise. She sat over there, listened to this film as I was watching it, and was so curious, she came over to the couch and watched the rest of the movie with me. Now let me tell you, if you are married to someone who is not a horror fan, much less a movie fan, if you see things like that happen, you know something has some kind of charm to it, some kind of specialty to it, that it's doing well. Let me tell you, she liked the film. She even said by the end of it that she really dug this. So take that into mind. If you're somebody that thinks this doesn't sound like your kind of movie, take the shot. Just watch it. It's usually on Tubi and stuff too, I think, from what I've seen. It may even still be on YouTube in parts. I don't know. So, check it out. Let me know what you think about it. I'd love to hear everything you have to say about this and the book. Let me know which one's better if you've read and watched both. Thank you all for watching, guys. God bless you all. Catch you later on another Hidden Horrors movie review at some point. Probably not anytime soon, but I have some stuff I have to review anyway after this that are not the biggest recommendations. So hopefully you tune in for that too. Thank you all for watching, guys, once again. God bless you again, and goodbye.